Throughout this series, I've already gone through 18 different street circuit locations. All of you have been requesting tracks you've wanted to see, and the list has felt seemingly endless. In fact, I'm still learning of tracks I didn't even realise existed, even now, by people in the comment section, and I enormously appreciate it. However, one track has been standing head and shoulders above the rest in terms of requests. I'd love to see this track. Can you do this track, please? I'm surprised you haven't done this track yet. When are you doing this track? Well, you can wait no more. Here it is, Baltimore. I probably don't need to tell you this, but I'm going to say it anyway because I've done it for every other episode, I think. The Baltimore Street Circuit hosted 3 IndyCar and American Le Mans Series races from 2011 to 2013. I think it's fair for me to mention that the life of this track/event was interesting, let's put it that way. I mean, in some ways, the difficult thing about doing a video on this is where to begin, because this track had so many issues, quirks and intriguing features that it's very tricky to pick which one to start off with. I guess we'll begin with the start itself because it just feels natural to do so. Typically, start-finish lines are located in areas where a long straight is. The main reason being, in a scenario where you're trying to create a place where you can put the entire field nose to tail, whether that be via a standing or rolling start, you need a section long enough where the whole field has a reasonable chance of going side by side. It's not always the case, but mostly is the case. The good news is, Baltimore did have that suitably long straight. However, there was a makeshift chicane marked by these rather menacing looking curbs, which meant that when the time for a start came, you had to wind your way through the chicane, then quickly get into double file to try and do a rolling start. There wasn't much space between the start-finish line and the end of the chicane, which meant that only the first 4 or 5 rows could get into the intended double file start before the green flag was waved. If you qualified badly and hoped you'd be able to make some places up at the start, then you can say goodbye to any of those aspirations. Perhaps 1 position, maybe 2 if the exact right set of circumstances fell in your favour. However, you'd have to be pretty fortunate. Although that being said, if you were in the American Le Mans Series race, then you would have a chance, because the cars would bypass those curbs and have a conventional double file start, albeit take the chicane the rest of the race. The IndyCar drivers said that the chicane was unnecessary, so for 2012 the chicane was removed, only for cars to get airborne. Yes, that's because I forgot to mention why the chicane was put there in the first place. It was so that the cars didn't go over the railroad tracks with too much ferocity. As this is quite clearly not what's meant to happen to a race car, after the bumps were mostly grinded out, a chicane was reinstalled. However, not exactly the same chicane. Instead of a right-left-right affair, instead, it was a quick left-right. However, that presented its own unique challenges. I don't mind this though. It was a challenge. A really big challenge. Really, really big challenge. It's a fast chicane, however the bumps will certainly unsettle these low-slung cars. In 2013, the chicane layout reverted back to the 2011 right-left-right affair. This time with a terrifying addition of the tyre bundles of nightmares. Okay, they weren't that scary, but still. In fact, I've just realised I've spent roughly 3 or 4 minutes talking about this one chicane on the track, and we've got another 2 or so miles to go. Actually, I'll just very quickly add that the curbs themselves were quite vicious, as these drivers demonstrated. Once you get past the start-finish line, you're met unsurprisingly with turn 1. It's sort of a 90-degree corner. However, at least the exit flows really nicely into a lovely sweeping bend at turn 2. It looks easy flat, which is true, except the easy part when you have bumps this violent. That being said though, I'm not going to just gloss over turn 1. It would be very foolish of me not to. It's probably your best overtaking place on the track. Despite the chicane, the straight is still long enough for you to get a good run. That slipstream will have an impact, as well as the heavy braking zone. However, it had its drawbacks. Firstly, it was Shall we say narrow? Yeah, I'm going to go with narrow. Also, perhaps in hindsight the race organisers on the IndyCar side were a bit more sensible than the American Le Mans Series ones were, because yes, whilst drivers who were at the back in the IndyCar race were in a position where it was pretty much impossible to gain positions, they got through turn 1 without any real issues. The same can't be said of the American Le Mans Series, who had a first corner traffic jam, more than likely a similar sight to what that corner would look like in typical Baltimore rush hour traffic, just with more exotic machinery. In fact, this section was quite susceptible to pile-ups. Furthermore, if you made a mistake or were trying to avoid any of the pile-ups that occurred, then there was an escape route which you could use to get round the track blockage. Unfortunately though, the corner was so tight that with the awful steering lock that these race cars had, it was also quite easy to get stuck there as well. Anyway, we really need to move on. I'm not too far away from already having gone over the lengths of a couple of my previous Street Track episodes, and I've only just finished talking about the first few corners. Turn 3, the concrete hairpin. Again, it's bumpy, but you can get an overtake done here. This section of track luckily opens up, meaning that you can make an attempt of a move similar to that of the last of the late breakers. However, you had to be careful. The concrete walls and its jagged edges could catch you out if you attempted to be too greedy. That being said though, this section was quite susceptible to pile-ups. You then head to turn 4. It's an open entry to the corner once again, but you turn into a portion of track which very much narrows up on the exit. You can get passes done, it's certainly not impossible. Plus it's a 90-degree corner, so that can be that box ticked in the Street Track Creating notebook. The thing is though, this section was quite susceptible to pile-ups. This next section though, luckily isn't susceptible, in either guises. Or at least the drivers never got themselves into that position. The first guise of the turn 5-6 section was a reasonably quick chicane with very little room for error. Wander off line ever so slightly and the walls will bite, and they weren't afraid to do so. However, the corner after that was perhaps more interesting than it should be. A very open corner, you went over a huge, deceptively huge, bump. Perhaps because you were going over train tracks again. However, that's because the tracks had been paved over using a temporary tarmac solution, which would be removed once racing had finished. It did a good job at making the track usable. I mean, if that's how bad the bump is, even with the tarmac on top of it, I dread to think what it would be like without it. Also, I quite like this anti-corner cutting solution, in the form of a row of tyres. It does look a bit strange there. Still, it does the job, along with protect the driver from hitting concrete walls. In 2012, the section changed. The straight was a tad longer, which then led you to a chicane, however nowhere near as tight and nowhere near as fast as the previous iteration. At this point you're probably wondering, we've got to turn 5 and we still haven't seen the pit lane. Well, that's where you'll find it, albeit the layout was slightly different in 2012 to as it was in 2011. The 2011 pit lane has to be one of the strangest I've ever seen. After you get past the tight chicane, where there's a gap in the pavement curbing, a gap was made in the wall, where a driver would drive through, to which you would reach a couple of 90-degree corners, one to the right and then two to the left, although the final two kind of just blended into one another as a hairpin. It looked quite awkward from a viewing perspective. However, one of the quirks of this pit lane is that it wasn't big enough to have all the team's pit boxes in one continuous line, so a couple of cars had to utilise the left-hand side of the pit lane to have their pit stops completed. In 2012, the pit lane entrance was a bit less awkward. It didn't completely eradicate all the awkwardness, but at least you had one less 90-degree corner to deal with. The pit lane exit was much better. Really smooth blend back onto the track, probably one of the best I've seen in a street circuit. The rest of the lap stayed the same from its beginning in 2011 to its ending in 2013. A fairly slow left-hander, one which you can't clip the inside wall too much, preferably not at all. The next turn is a fairly quick corner, by this track standards, but it is still in essence a 90-degree corner. But we then head into a selection of fantastic corners. A slight kink to the left, which in turn sets you up for the next corner. An open right-hand turn, which looks really satisfying to get right. There's also lots of room exiting the corner, however it tightens back up quite dramatically on the following straight, before we head to what in my opinion is the best section of the track from a driving perspective. 3 corners which go from fast sweeper to slow 90-degree right-hander, gradually getting slower, which as you can see, posed a large number of problems. A great sequence of corners, not the sort that you would see on a street circuit at all usually. Then it's back onto the long straight, until you reach the chicane to finish the lap. And just like that, we've gone over a lap of this circuit. Although that being said, I've still got a few things that are probably worth mentioning. Firstly, in the 2013 American Le Mans Series race, the circuit was blocked before they even got to the start line to begin the race, causing an incredibly long delay. When it rained, unsurprisingly, with a lot of the track surface being concrete, it was pretty slippery. A safety truck in the beginning of the IndyCar race in 2011 just got out of the way in time for the onrushing pack. A manhole cover also came loose during one of the races. Jerome Blakemolen picked up a loose wheel and put it in the passenger seat of his Porsche. Plus, this track's deal was meant to have lasted beyond 2013. However, due to scheduling conflicts, ultimately that was not the case. Although to be honest, we should be quite glad that this event even lasted beyond 2011, with the original organisation to have hosted the race having their contract terminated due to unpaid debts. After another change of organiser ended up going south as well, the event was eventually run in part with Michael Andretti and his sports marketing company, which gave the event a new lease of life. After all of this, I would say I can take a deep breath, but I can't because I've got to give my conclusions on this track and event. I know why a lot of people have wanted to see this track become an episode. The past however many minutes of me showing this track's trials and tribulations have given people who may have not seen this track reason to think that this was an unmitigated disaster. Personally speaking, I really enjoyed watching the cars thunder around the streets of Baltimore. Overtaking wasn't easy, and yes, the track suffered from some maintenance issues. However, the cars looked so out of place on that track that in some ways it was quite cool. Although despite my opinion, I do concede that whilst this track was unique, it was perhaps too bonkers to be taken seriously by people watching the event. I'm glad it existed, but perhaps we shouldn't have a track with similar characteristics to this in the future. Now I can take my deep breath because finally we've come to the end of this episode. Thank you very much for watching. What were your thoughts on the Baltimore Street Circuit? Say your thoughts in the comment section below, along with any other street tracks you'd like to see featured in this series. Plus, whilst I don't usually say this particular video took a long time to do, so if you did enjoy the video, then I'd be enormously appreciative if you did press the like and subscribe button. If you think this video or indeed any of my content can be improved in any way, then I'm very much open to constructive criticism, because I want to get better and better at these. So please type down in the comment section what you think. After all of that though, I very much need to lie down. So until the next video, enjoy the rest of your day.